The city lights of Manhattan sparkled through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the executive office on the 42nd floor. Alexander stood with his hands in his pockets, staring at the view he had worked 15 years to earn. Another quarter, another record-breaking profit margin. The tech company he had built from nothing was now worth billions. His phone buzzed with congratulatory messages from board members and investors. He should have felt proud. Instead, he felt nothing. You know, for someone who just made another $100 million, you look absolutely miserable. Alexander turned to see his younger sister standing in the doorway, arms crossed, wearing that look she always had when she was about to meddle in his life. At 28, Sophie had a way of cutting through all his defenses with just one glance. "I'm not miserable. I'm busy," he replied, moving back to his desk covered with reports and contracts. Sophie walked in and sat on the edge of his desk, deliberately blocking his view of the documents. "When was the last time you went home before midnight? When was the last time you had dinner with another human being? And no, business lunches don't count. Last week, I had dinner with the investors from Tokyo. That's exactly my point." Sophie picked up a framed photo from his desk. It was from 5 years ago at their mother's birthday party. Alexander looked different then, younger, with something in his eyes that had long since disappeared. "Mom called me yesterday. She said you canceled Sunday dinner again." Alexander sighed and leaned back in his chair. Something came up. "There was an issue with the European expansion that needed my attention. There's always something that needs your attention. You've become a ghost, Alex. You're here, but you're not really living." Sophie set the photo down carefully. "Do you even remember the last time you went on a date? A real date, not a networking event where someone's daughter happened to sit next to you." He couldn't remember. The last few years had blurred together in an endless cycle of meetings, deals, and 18-hour workdays. There had been dates, sure. Women his friends set him up with. Women who approached him at charity galas. But they all followed the same script. They Googled him before meeting, knew his net worth down to the last million, and spent the evening either trying to impress him or pitch their own business ideas. "Dating isn't exactly a priority right now," Alexander said. Sophie pulled out her phone and started typing. "That's about to change. I'm setting you up on a blind date." "Absolutely not. I wasn't asking for permission. Friday night, 7 o'clock, that Italian restaurant on 5th Avenue, the one with the private tables in the back." Alexander stood up from his chair. "Sophie, I appreciate the concern, but I'm not going on a blind date. I have work to do." His sister looked up from her phone and her expression shifted from playful to serious. "Grandma called me this morning. She asked about your girlfriend. You know, the one you've been telling her about for the past 6 months?" Alexander felt his stomach drop. He had made the mistake of lying to their grandmother during her last hospital visit. She had been so worried about him being alone, so anxious about his happiness that he had invented a fictional girlfriend just to give her peace of mind. I was going to tell her the truth eventually. Well, eventually is coming faster than you think. She wants to meet this mystery woman at Thanksgiving. That's 5 weeks away." Sophie smiled sweetly. "So here's the deal. You go on this one blind date, give it an honest chance, and I won't tell Grandma that you've been lying to her for half a year. That's blackmail. That's family. So what's it going to be?" Alexander knew when he was beaten. His grandmother was 86 years old and had already survived 2 heart attacks. The stress of knowing he had lied to her might actually cause another one. "Fine, 1 date. But when it goes badly, and it will go badly, you have to help me figure out what to tell Grandma." "Deal," Sophie said, already texting again. "Her name is Rachel. She's wonderful. And before you ask, no, I'm not telling you anything else about her. The whole point of a blind date is that it's blind." "Where did you even meet this person?" Sophie looked up with a mysterious smile. "You'll find out on Friday. Just be there at 7, and Alex, try not to mention work. Try not to mention money. Just try to be yourself. The version of yourself that existed before you decided to become a corporate robot." After Sophie left, Alexander tried to focus on work, but his mind kept drifting to Friday night. He had been on dozens of these setups before. Friends, family members, even his own executives had tried to play matchmaker over the years. It always ended the same way. The woman would arrive, perfectly dressed and perfectly prepared. She would have researched him online, memorized his company's stock price, and prepared questions about his investment strategy. Within 20 minutes, they would both realize they had nothing genuine to talk about. Within an hour, he would politely end the evening with a promise to call that he never kept. This would be no different. Sophie meant well, but she didn't understand what his life had become. He existed in a different world now. A world where every conversation was a negotiation, where every relationship had an ulterior motive, and where genuine connection was as rare as finding gold in a city street. Friday evening arrived too quickly. Alexander spent the entire day in back-to-back meetings, hoping he might have a legitimate excuse to cancel. But by 6:30 he was out of options. He changed from his work suit into something more casual, dark jeans and a button-down shirt, and headed to the restaurant, the Italian place Sophie had chosen was one of those upscale spots where the menu had no prices and the wine list looked like a novel. Alexander had been there before for business dinners. The staff knew him by name and by reputation. As he walked in, the manager immediately approached with a warm smile. "Mr. Sterling, wonderful to see you again. Your table is ready." Alexander followed him to a private corner table partially hidden by an elegant wooden partition. It offered privacy while still allowing a view of the main dining room. He checked his watch. 6:58. At least he was on time. 7 o'clock came and went. Then 7:15. Alexander ordered a scotch and tried not to feel relieved at the thought that she might not show up. That would solve everything. He could tell Sophie he tried, tell Grandma that things didn't work out, and go back to his comfortable, predictable routine. At 7:30, he was about to signal for the check when there was a commotion at the restaurant entrance. A woman rushed in, slightly out of breath, wearing pale blue scrubs and white sneakers. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she had the exhausted look of someone who had been on their feet for hours. The hostess seemed confused, clearly not expecting someone dressed like that in this particular establishment. Alexander watched with mild curiosity, assuming the woman was lost or looking for someone. Then she pulled out her phone, checked something, and looked directly at his table. Their eyes met across the room, and Alexander felt something unexpected: surprise. The woman walked toward him, navigating between tables with an apologetic expression. As she got closer, he noticed the small coffee stain on her scrubs, the tired lines around her eyes, and the complete absence of makeup or jewelry. She looked absolutely nothing like any woman he had ever been set up with before. "I am so sorry," she said, sliding into the chair across from him. "I know I'm late. Actually, I'm ridiculously late. There was an emergency at work, and then I completely forgot about tonight until your sister called me 20 minutes ago. And I didn't have time to go home and change. And honestly, I probably should have just canceled. But Sophie was so insistent and—" She stopped abruptly, realizing she was rambling. "I'm Rachel, by the way, and you must think I'm a complete disaster." Alexander found himself smiling for the first time all week. "I'm Alex, and honestly, I was expecting you to cancel. Most people would have. I probably should have," Rachel admitted, looking down at her scrubs with embarrassment. "I work at the children's hospital downtown. We had a situation with one of our long-term patients, and I couldn't just leave. But I also didn't want to completely bail on Sophie after she's been asking me to do this for weeks." "How do you know my sister?" "She volunteers at the hospital every Tuesday and Thursday. She reads to the kids in the pediatric wing. She's actually amazing with them." Rachel accepted a menu from a passing waiter, and her eyes widened at the prices. Oh, wow. This place is fancy." Alexander noticed her discomfort and felt a strange urge to put her at ease. "We can go somewhere else if you want. There's a great pizza place around the corner. Much more casual." Rachel looked at him with genuine surprise. "Really? You wouldn't mind?" "Honestly, I'd prefer it. This place is nice, but it's a bit much for a first date." He signaled for the check, leaving enough cash to cover his drink and a generous tip. 20 minutes later, they were sitting in a tiny pizzeria with plastic tablecloths and a jukebox in the corner. Rachel had visibly relaxed, and so had Alexander. This wasn't like any date he had been on in years. There was no performance, no agenda, just two people sitting across from each other eating pizza. "So Sophie said you work in technology," Rachel said, taking a bite of her slice. "What do you do exactly?" Alexander hesitated. This was the moment he usually dreaded. But something about Rachel's genuine curiosity made him want to keep things simple. "I run a tech company. We do software development, mostly business applications. It's not that exciting, honestly. Lots of meetings and problem solving. Sophie makes it sound like you work constantly. She's not wrong. I probably work too much. He took a sip of his beer. What about you? How long have you been a nurse? Rachel's face lit up, and Alexander realized it was the first time all evening she had truly smiled. 8 years. I specialized in pediatrics because, honestly, kids are so much more honest than adults. They tell you exactly how they feel. No pretense, no games. If they're scared, they say so. If they're in pain, they cry. And when they finally smile after weeks of treatment, it's the most rewarding thing in the world. That sounds incredibly hard, though. Emotionally, I mean. It is, Rachel admitted. We lost a patient last month. A 10-year-old boy with leukemia. I still think about him every day. But then I have moments like today. One of our long-term patients, a little girl who's been in and out of treatment for 3 years, she laughed at my terrible joke. Like really laughed, and I realized that's why I do this, for those moments. Alexander found himself genuinely engaged in a way he hadn't been in years. Rachel wasn't trying to impress him. She wasn't name-dropping or humble bragging. She was just talking about her life with honesty and passion. Your sister said you needed to get out more. That you're a workaholic. She's not subtle, is she? Alexander laughed. What else did Sophie tell you about me? Not much, actually. Just that you're her brother, you work too hard, and you could use someone who isn't afraid to tell you the truth. Rachel looked at him curiously. She didn't even show me a picture of you. I had no idea what to expect. And what's your verdict so far? Rachel considered the question seriously. You seem nice. A little guarded, maybe. Like you're used to people wanting something from you. But nice, her perception caught him off guard. Is it that obvious? I work with anxious kids all day. You learn to read people pretty quickly. Rachel's phone buzzed on the table. She glanced at it and her expression changed. I'm sorry. I have to take this. She stepped outside to answer the call, and Alexander watched through the window as her body language shifted. Something was wrong. When she came back inside, she was already grabbing her bag. I have to go. There's a situation at the hospital. One of my patients is having complications, and her mom specifically asked for me. Of course, go. Is everything okay? I hope so. Rachel paused, looking genuinely apologetic. I really am sorry about tonight. The lateness, the scrubs, and now this. You probably think I'm the worst date in history. Alexander stood up with her. Actually, this has been the best date I've had in years. Rachel looked surprised. Really? Really? You're genuine. That's rare. He pulled out his phone. Can I have your number? I'd like to do this again. Maybe when you're not being called away for emergencies. She smiled and quickly scribbled her number on a napkin from the dispenser. I'd like that too. And next time I promise to wear actual clothes instead of scrubs. I don't know. The scrubs are kind of working for you. Rachel laughed and headed for the door, then turned back one more time. Hey, Alex? Thanks for being understanding. Most guys would have been annoyed by all of this. Most guys are idiots. After she left, Alexander sat back down and stared at the napkin with her number written in slightly smudged ink. For the first time in longer than he could remember, he was looking forward to something that had nothing to do with work. He had arrived at this restaurant expecting another disappointing evening. Another rehearsed conversation with someone who saw him as a prize to be won. Instead, he had met someone who didn't seem to want anything from him at all. Someone who had rushed to his table in coffee-stained scrubs without caring how she looked. Someone who left in the middle of their date because a scared patient needed her more. Alexander paid the bill and walked out into the Manhattan night. The city felt different somehow. The same buildings, the same crowds, but something had shifted. He pulled out his phone to text Sophie. You were right. She's wonderful. His sister's response came back immediately. I told you so. Don't mess this up. As Alexander walked back to his apartment, he couldn't help smiling. He had no idea what would happen next. He didn't know if Rachel would actually want to see him again, or if this was just a one-time moment of connection in an otherwise disconnected life. But for the first time in years, he felt something he had almost forgotten existed. Hope. And maybe, just maybe, the chance at something real. 3 days passed before Alexander finally texted Rachel. He had wanted to reach out immediately after their date, but something held him back. Maybe it was the fear of seeming too eager. Maybe it was the knowledge that once he started this, he would have to maintain the version of himself he had presented that night. Not the billionaire CEO whose face appeared in business magazines. Just Alex, a guy who worked in technology. When he finally sent the message, he kept it simple. Hey, it's Alex. How's your patient doing? The one from Friday night? Rachel's response came within minutes. She's stable now. Thank you for asking. That means a lot. Glad to hear it. Are you free this week? Maybe Wednesday evening? I work until 6, but I'm free after that. What did you have in mind? Alexander thought about it. He couldn't take her to any of his usual spots. Too many people knew him there. He needed somewhere normal, somewhere he could just be himself without the weight of recognition. There's a food truck festival in Brooklyn. Street food, live music, very casual. Interested? That sounds perfect. I'll meet you there at 7? Wednesday couldn't come fast enough. Alexander found himself distracted during meetings, checking his phone more than usual, counting down the hours. His assistant noticed the change in his behavior but wisely said nothing. Sophie, however, had no such restraint. She called him Tuesday evening, her voice full of barely contained excitement. So, how was it? Did you call her? Are you seeing her again? We're meeting tomorrow, Alexander admitted. I knew it. I knew you two would hit it off. She's special, isn't she? She is. But Sophie, I need to ask you something. What exactly did you tell her about me? There was a pause on the other end. I told her you're my brother, that you work in tech, that you're kind, but you work too much and you need someone to remind you there's a world outside your office. Why? You didn't mention the company? Or anything about money? Of course not. Why would I? That's not who you are, Alex. That's just what you do. Sophie's voice softened. You're worried she'll find out and everything will change, aren't you? It always does. Maybe this time will be different. Just give it a chance. Be honest with her. Eventually. Wednesday evening found Alexander waiting near the entrance to the food truck festival. He had dressed down even more than usual, wearing jeans and a simple t-shirt. He felt exposed without the armor of his suits and executive presence. But he also felt more like himself than he had in years. Rachel arrived right on time wearing a sundress and sneakers, her hair down for the first time since he'd met her. She looked completely different from the exhausted nurse in scrubs, but somehow exactly the same. There was that same genuine warmth in her smile, that same unguarded openness in her eyes. You look nice, Alexander said, immediately feeling awkward about how simple the compliment sounded. Thanks. You clean up pretty well yourself. Rachel looked around at the festival. I haven't been to one of these in forever. Where should we start? They wandered through the rows of food trucks, trying everything from Korean tacos to gourmet grilled cheese to artisanal ice cream. Rachel insisted on paying for half, which Alexander found both refreshing and challenging. He was used to always picking up the check, used to being expected to pay for everything. This felt different, equal. As they ate, they talked. Really talked. Rachel told him about growing up in a small town in upstate New York, the youngest of 4 kids in a family where money was always tight. She talked about her father, a mechanic who worked 2 jobs to send his kids to college, about her mother, a teacher who made every dollar stretch and taught her children that wealth wasn't measured in money but in love and integrity. Is that why you became a nurse? Alexander asked. Because of your parents? Partly. But also because I spent a lot of time in hospitals as a kid. My older brother had asthma, really severe. We'd end up in the ER at least once a month when I was growing up. I saw how scared he was, how scared all of us were. And I saw how the nurses made it bearable. They weren't just doing medical procedures. They were offering comfort, reassurance, humanity. I wanted to be that for other families. That's beautiful. My reasons for getting into business were nowhere near that noble. Rachel tilted her head, curious. What were your reasons? Alexander thought about how to answer without revealing too much. My parents immigrated here with nothing. My dad worked 3 jobs while my mom cleaned houses. They sacrificed everything so Sophie and I could have opportunities they never had. When my dad died, I realized how fragile financial security really is. One medical emergency, one missed paycheck, and everything falls apart. I wanted to build something stable. Something that would mean my family would never have to struggle like that again. It wasn't a lie. It was the truest thing he had said in years. Just not the complete story. Did you succeed? Rachel asked gently. In some ways, yes. In others, I'm not so sure anymore. They found a spot on the grass near the stage where a local band was setting up. As the sun began to set, the festival lights came on, casting everything in a warm glow. Rachel leaned back on her hands, looking up at the sky. Can I ask you something personal? She said, Sure. Your sister seems really worried about you. Like genuinely concerned that you're working yourself to death. Is she right to worry? Alexander lay back on the grass next to her. Probably. I've spent the last 15 years building my company. It's all I've thought about, all I've focused on. And somewhere along the way, I forgot to build anything else. No relationships that matter. No hobbies. No life outside work. I'm 38 years old and I can't remember the last time I did something just because it made me happy. Until now? Rachel asked, turning her head to look at him. Until now, he confirmed. The band started playing, filling the air with upbeat indie rock. They lay there listening, not needing to fill the silence with conversation. Alexander couldn't remember the last time he had felt this peaceful. This present. His phone buzzed several times in his pocket with work emails, but for once he ignored them. After the band finished their set, they decided to walk along the Brooklyn waterfront. The Manhattan skyline glittered across the water, and Alexander found himself looking at his own building among the towers. From here, it was just another light in the distance. Do you ever think about doing something else? Rachel asked as they walked. Like, if you could do anything in the world, what would it be? Honestly, I don't know anymore. When I was younger, I had all these dreams. I wanted to change the world, make technology accessible to everyone, solve real problems. But somewhere along the way, it became more about growth and market share and investor returns. I lost sight of why I started. He looked at her. What about you? Have you always wanted to be a nurse? Actually, I wanted to be a marine biologist when I was a kid. I was obsessed with dolphins. Rachel laughed at the memory. But then life happened, and I found something that mattered more. I don't regret it. Every day is hard, but it's meaningful. I go home exhausted, but I also go home knowing I made a difference. Even if it's just making one scared kid smile. That's more than most people can say. They reached a bench overlooking the water and sat down. Rachel pulled her knees up to her chest, wrapping her arms around them. Can I tell you something? And you have to promise not to judge me. I promise. I looked you up online after our first date. Alexander's stomach dropped. Oh, don't worry, I didn't find much. There's an Alex Sterling who works in tech, but the only information was a very boring LinkedIn profile with no picture. Was that you? He had created that profile years ago, back when he was still accessible, still just another entrepreneur trying to make it. He had abandoned it once his company took off, once maintaining privacy became essential. Yeah, that's me. Good, because honestly I was worried you might be hiding something, like a wife or a criminal record or something. Rachel laughed. I know that sounds paranoid, but you hear these stories, you know? Anyway, I'm glad you're just a regular guy who works too much. The guilt hit him like a physical weight. She trusted him. She believed he was exactly who he said he was. And he was lying to her, not directly, but by omission, which felt just as bad. Rachel, Oh my God, Rachel interrupted, pointing across the water. Look. Fireworks had started going off somewhere in Manhattan, probably from a corporate event or celebration. They lit up the sky in brilliant bursts of color reflecting off the water. Rachel's face glowed with childlike wonder, and Alexander decided the confession could wait. He didn't want to ruin this moment. Over the next 2 weeks, they fell into a pattern. They would meet 3 or 4 times a week, always at places Alexander knew he wouldn't be recognized. Neighborhood diners, indie movie theaters, community parks. Rachel introduced him to her world, and he found himself loving every minute of it. She took him to a volunteer event at the animal shelter where she spent her Saturday mornings. Alexander, who had never owned a pet in his life, found himself walking dogs and cleaning kennels alongside her. One of the dogs, an elderly golden retriever named Buddy, took an immediate liking to him. He likes you, Rachel said, watching as Buddy rested his head on Alexander's lap. Dogs are good judges of character, or he just knows I have treats in my pocket. That too, she admitted with a grin. Alexander brought Rachel to his favorite bookstore, a tiny independent shop in the village that he used to frequent before his life got too busy. They spent 2 hours browsing, and Rachel bought him a book about the early days of Silicon Valley. You should remember where you came from, she said, handing it to him. Before all the meetings and stress, back when you loved what you were doing. Another night they had dinner at Rachel's apartment. It was a studio in a building with questionable heating and a leaky faucet, but she had made it home. Plants everywhere, photos of her family on every surface, a well-loved couch with mismatched throw pillows. She cooked pasta while he sat at her small kitchen table and they talked about everything and nothing. "This is nice," Alexander said, looking around. "Cozy. It's tiny," Rachel corrected. "But it's mine. Well, mine and the bank's for another 20 years. You have a mortgage? And student loans. Welcome to the American dream." She didn't sound bitter, just matter of fact. "But I'm lucky. I have a job I love, a place to live, and I can pay my bills. Most months, anyway." Alexander thought about the penthouse apartment he rarely spent time in. The 5,000 square feet of marble and designer furniture that felt more like a hotel than a home. "I think your place has more personality than mine." "That's because I actually live in mine," Rachel teased. "You probably just sleep in yours between work shifts." She wasn't wrong. As they were cleaning up after dinner, Rachel's phone rang. She glanced at it and her expression changed. "I'm so sorry. It's the hospital. Do you mind if I take this?" "Of course not." He watched as she stepped into the tiny bathroom, the only place in the studio that offered any privacy. He could hear her voice through the thin door, professional and caring, discussing medication dosages and patient care plans. When she emerged 10 minutes later, she looked frustrated. "Everything okay?" Alexander asked. "Not really. The hospital is having budget issues. They're talking about cutting staff in the pediatric wing, which means longer hours for those of us who stay, and worse care for the kids who need us most." She sat down heavily on the couch. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't dump this on you." "No, please. Tell me about it." Rachel explained the situation. The hospital had been struggling financially for years. Wealthy donors preferred to give to research centers and facilities that bore their names. The day-to-day operations of a pediatric ward didn't have the same appeal. Meanwhile, the need kept growing. More kids, more complex cases, fewer resources to help them. "The thing that kills me is there are people in this city with more money than they could spend in 10 lifetimes, and kids are suffering because we can't afford basic supplies. It's not right." Alexander felt something shift inside him. Here was a real problem. A problem that wasn't about algorithms or market share. A problem that mattered. What would it take to fix it? The budget issue, I mean. Honestly, a miracle. Or about $5 million, Rachel laughed bitterly. So yeah, a miracle. Alexander's mind was already working. 5 million was nothing to him. Less than he spent on office renovations last year. He could fix this, but how could he do it without revealing who he really was? What if someone wanted to donate anonymously? Would the hospital accept that? Rachel looked at him strangely. "I mean, yes, of course. But why are you asking?" "Just curious. It seems like the kind of thing people with money should care about." "You'd think, right?" Rachel moved closer to him on the couch. "But most wealthy people want recognition. They want their name on a building or a plaque or a press release. They're not actually interested in helping. They're interested in looking like they're helping." The words stung because Alexander knew they were true. He had been to countless charity galas where millionaires and billionaires congratulated themselves for their generosity, while spending more on the event itself than they donated. He had been one of them. "Not everyone is like that," he said quietly. "I hope you're right. Because right now we need someone who actually cares more than they care about credit." That night, after Rachel walked him to the door with a kiss that made his heart race like he was a teenager again, Alexander made a decision. He would save the pediatric wing, but he had to do it carefully in a way that wouldn't lead back to him. Not yet. Not until he figured out how to tell Rachel the truth without losing her. Over the next few days, Alexander worked with his foundation director to arrange an anonymous donation to Rachel's hospital. $5 million, earmarked specifically for the pediatric wing. No strings attached, no publicity required, just money to help kids who needed it. The news broke on a Thursday morning. Alexander was in a meeting when his phone started buzzing with news alerts. Anonymous donor saves Children's Hospital with $5 million gift. He felt a surge of satisfaction, imagining Rachel's reaction when she heard. But his satisfaction turned to dread when he saw the full article. The hospital, in their excitement, had released a press statement thanking the donor, and while they hadn't released his name, they had released his company's name, Sterling Technologies Foundation. It was only a matter of time before Rachel connected the dots. His phone rang. It was Sophie. "Please tell me you thought this through," his sister said without preamble. "Please tell me you have a plan for when Rachel figures out who you really are." "I was helping her." "The hospital needed money, I know. And that's beautiful and generous and exactly the kind of thing you should be doing. But Alex, you've been lying to her for weeks. Not directly, but by omission. And now she's going to find out from a news article instead of from you. Alexander closed his eyes. I know. You need to tell her, today, before she figures it out herself. But he was too late. His phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. It was a link to the news article, followed by a single question mark, then another message. Is there something you need to tell me? Alexander stared at his phone, his carefully constructed world crumbling around him. He had found something real, something genuine, something that made him feel alive for the first time in years, and he was about to lose it because he hadn't had the courage to be honest from the beginning. He typed out several responses and deleted them all. How do you explain that you're not who someone thought you were? How do you justify weeks of deception, even if it came from a place of wanting to be seen as just a person, not a fortune? Finally, he sent a simple reply. Can we talk? In person? The response took 5 minutes to come through. 5 minutes that felt like hours. My place. 8 o'clock, and Alex? This better be good. Alexander looked around his office at the empire he had built, at the view of a city where he had everything money could buy and nothing that actually mattered. He had 6 hours to figure out how to explain himself. 6 hours to find the words that might save the only real thing in his life. He wasn't sure they existed. Alexander stood outside Rachel's apartment building at exactly 8 o'clock. He had rehearsed what he wanted to say 100 times during the drive over, but now that he was here, every word felt inadequate. Through the glass door, he could see the worn lobby with its flickering light and the ancient elevator that probably hadn't been updated since the 70s. This building represented everything real about Rachel's life, and he had been hiding from her that he lived in a completely different world. He buzzed her apartment. The intercom crackled. Come up. Her voice was flat, giving nothing away. The elevator ride to the 4th floor felt like the longest minute of his life. When the doors opened, Rachel was standing in her doorway, arms crossed. She had changed from her scrubs into jeans and a sweater. Her expression was unreadable. Hi, Alexander said, stepping into the hallway. Hi. She moved aside to let him in, then closed the door behind them. The small apartment felt different now. Less cozy, more confined. She didn't offer him a seat. So, Sterling Technologies. That's your company? Yes, not just work for. You own it. You founded it. Yes. Rachel walked to her tiny kitchen counter and picked up her phone. She pulled up a news article and began reading aloud. Alexander Sterling, founder and CEO of Sterling Technologies, one of the fastest growing tech companies in the world. Net worth estimated at $3.2 billion. One of Manhattan's most eligible bachelors. Recently made headlines with a $5 million anonymous donation to St. Michael's Children's Hospital. She looked up at him. Did I miss anything? Rachel, please let me explain. Explain what exactly? That you've been lying to me for 3 weeks? That while I was talking about my student loans and my leaky faucet, you were probably thinking how quaint it all was? How adorable that I insisted on splitting the check at the food truck. It wasn't like that. Then what was it like, Alex? Or should I call you Alexander? Or Mr. Sterling? Her voice cracked slightly, and Alexander realized she wasn't just angry. She was hurt. It's Alex. It's always been Alex. That part was real. Was it? Because I don't even know who you are. I thought you were just a regular guy who worked in tech. Someone who understood what it's like to worry about bills and work long hours. Someone like me. Rachel sat down on her couch, suddenly looking exhausted. Why didn't you tell me? Alexander sat down carefully on the opposite end of the couch, maintaining distance. Do you remember what you said on our first date? About how you Googled me and didn't find much? Yeah, I was relieved. For the first time in years, I was meeting someone who didn't know. Who didn't see dollar signs when they looked at me. Who wasn't trying to pitch me a business idea or get me to invest in their startup or introduce them to my network. He ran his hands through his hair. Do you have any idea how lonely it is? Everyone wants something from you. Every conversation is a transaction. Every relationship has an angle. So you decided to lie instead? I decided to be myself. Just myself. Not the company, not the money, not the reputation. Just a guy who liked spending time with you. Alexander looked at her directly. Everything else was real, Rachel. Every conversation, every moment we spent together. That wasn't the billionaire CEO. That was me. Rachel was quiet for a long moment. The donation. That was because of our conversation, wasn't it? When I told you about the hospital's budget problems? Yes. You just casually decided to donate $5 million. Like it was nothing. It's not nothing. But Rachel, you talked about kids suffering because of money. Kids who needed help and couldn't get it. How could I not do something when I had the ability to fix it? You could have told me. You could have been honest about who you are and what you wanted to do. And if I had shown up on that first date and said, "Hi, I'm Alexander Sterling, Billionaire CEO," would you have even stayed for dinner? Would you have let yourself be real with me? Rachel opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again. After a moment, she said quietly, "I don't know. Maybe not. That's why I didn't tell you. Because for the first time in 15 years, someone was looking at me and just seeing a person. Someone who worked too much and didn't know how to relax. Someone who needed to remember what life felt like outside of boardrooms and quarterly reports." Alexander's voice grew softer. "You made me feel human again, Rachel. And I was terrified that if you knew the truth, I'd lose that." "You don't get to make that choice for me," Rachel said. "You don't get to decide what I can handle or how I'll react. That's not how relationships work. You're right. I know you're right. And I'm sorry. I should have told you sooner. I just kept waiting for the right moment. And then the right moment never came. And then it had been weeks and I didn't know how to bring it up without everything falling apart." Rachel stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the street below. "Do you know what the worst part is? I really liked you. The you I thought I knew. The guy who ate street tacos and walked dogs at the shelter and lay on the grass listening to music. I liked that person so much. That person is real. That's who I am when I'm with you. But he's not the whole truth, is he?" She turned back to face him. "You have this entire life I know nothing about. Board meetings and business deals and a penthouse apartment I've never seen. You probably have drivers and assistants and people who manage your schedule. You exist in a completely different world than I do." "A world I hate," Alexander said, standing up. "Rachel, I meant what I said that night at the food truck. I've spent 15 years building something, and somewhere along the way I lost myself. I lost the reason I started. I became exactly the kind of person I used to despise. And then I met you, and suddenly I remembered who I used to be, who I wanted to be. That's not fair. You can't put that on me. I'm not responsible for making you feel like a better person. I'm not asking you to be. I'm just trying to explain why I did what I did. It wasn't about deceiving you. It was about getting to be myself without all the noise that comes with my life." Rachel wrapped her arms around herself. "I need to think. This is a lot to process. I understand. The thing is, Alex, I come from a world where people work 2 jobs to make ends meet, where a medical emergency can bankrupt a family, where $5 million is an impossible, unimaginable amount of money, and you just threw it around like it was nothing because I mentioned a problem." She shook her head. "We're from different planets. We don't have to be, don't we? Can you honestly tell me that this could work? That you're going to keep eating at diners and taking the subway and pretending to be someone you're not?" "I'm not pretending. The subway thing, the diners, spending time at the animal shelter, that's more real to me than anything I've done in years. My regular life is the pretense, shaking hands and making deals and attending galas where everyone is performing for each other. That's the mask. You're the only person who's seen me without it." Rachel looked at him with tears in her eyes. "I want to believe you, but I also feel like an idiot. Like I was the only one who didn't know the truth about what was happening. Your sister knew. Sophie knew exactly who you were when she set us up. Sophie thought we'd be good for each other. She thought I needed someone who could remind me there's more to life than work. And she thought you needed someone who could see past the money to the person underneath." Alexander took a tentative step closer. She was right about both things. "I need time," Rachel said again. "I need to figure out if I can trust you again. If we can build something real when it started with something that wasn't entirely honest. How much time? I don't know. Please just go." Alexander nodded. He had expected this, but it still felt like a punch to the gut. "Can I ask you one thing before I leave?" "What?" "The donation to the hospital. Are you angry about that too? Because if it's causing problems, I can—" "Don't you dare," Rachel interrupted. "That money is going to save lives. Kids who need surgery and medication and care are going to get it because of what you did. I'm not angry about that. I'm grateful. The whole hospital is grateful. I just wish you had told me instead of letting me find out from a news article. I wanted it to be anonymous. Nothing is truly anonymous when you're that wealthy. Someone always finds out." Alexander walked to the door, then paused with his hand on the knob. "For what it's worth, the last 3 weeks have been the happiest I've been in years. Real happiness, not just satisfaction from closing a deal or hitting a target. You did that. You reminded me what it feels like to actually live. Don't, Rachel whispered. Don't make this harder than it already is. He left without another word. The next 2 weeks were the longest of Alexander's life. He threw himself back into work, but nothing held his attention. His assistant noticed he was staring at his phone constantly, waiting for a message that never came. Sophie called him every day, offering support and occasionally tough love. You messed up, she told him during one particularly brutal conversation, but you messed up for understandable reasons. Give her space. If it's meant to work out, it will. And if it's not, then at least you got to experience something real. That's more than a lot of people can say. Alexander started spending more time with his foundation director, getting personally involved in the charitable work his company funded. He visited the children's hospital, not to see Rachel, but to see where his money was going. He met kids who were getting treatment they desperately needed. He talked to doctors and nurses who could finally do their jobs without worrying about budget constraints. One nurse, an older woman who had worked there for 30 years, pulled him aside. I don't know if anyone told you this, but Rachel took your donation personally. What do you mean? She feels responsible. Like she guilt-tripped you into giving money. She's been working double shifts, volunteering for everything. Like she's trying to prove the hospital deserves the investment. The nurse looked at him kindly. Whatever happened between you two, she cares about you. I've known that girl for 8 years, and I've never seen her like this over anyone. The information should have made him feel better. Instead, it made him feel worse. He had wanted to help, but somehow he had managed to make Rachel feel like she owed him something. Alexander left the hospital and found himself just walking through the city, no destination in mind. He ended up in the neighborhood where the food truck festival had been. The space was empty now, just an ordinary parking lot, but he could still remember exactly where they had sat on the grass looking up at fireworks, and he had almost told her the truth. He should have. That night he should have been honest. His phone rang. It was a number he didn't recognize. Hello? Alex, it's me, Rachel. His heart started pounding. Hi, can you meet me somewhere? I think we need to talk. Of course. Where? The bookstore. The one in the village you took me to. Can you be there in an hour? I'll be there in 20 minutes. Alexander practically ran to find a car. Traffic was heavy, and every red light felt like torture. When he finally reached the bookstore, Rachel was already there, browsing the fiction section. She looked up when he walked in, and he couldn't read her expression. They found a quiet corner in the back of the store, away from other customers. I've been thinking, Rachel started, a lot about everything you said, about trust and honesty in different worlds. Alexander waited, afraid to breathe. I talked to your sister. She told me things about your life that you didn't tell me, about how your father died, about the pressure you've been under, about how lonely you've been. Rachel looked down at her hands. She also told me about all the times you've been used by people who only wanted your money. I'm starting to understand why you did what you did. Rachel, let me finish. I'm not saying it was okay. You should have been honest with me. But I also should have given you the benefit of the doubt. I should have listened more carefully when you tried to explain. She looked up at him. The truth is, I've been scared too. Scared that someone like you couldn't really be interested in someone like me. Scared that once the novelty wore off, you'd realize we're too different. We're not that different. We are, though. And that's okay. Different doesn't mean impossible. Rachel took a deep breath. I want to try again. But this time we do it right. No secrets. You show me your world and I'll show you mine. We figure out if there's a way to build something together that's real for both of us. Alexander felt hope flooding through him. Are you sure? No, but I'm willing to find out. Because the truth is, I miss you. I miss the guy who walked dogs with me and ate terrible pizza and lay on the grass like he didn't have a care in the world. And I think that guy is real, even if he's also a billionaire CEO. He is real. I promise you he is. Then let's start over. Hi, I'm Rachel Mitchell. I'm a pediatric nurse with student loans and a leaky faucet and a tendency to work too much. Alexander smiled, feeling lighter than he had in weeks. Hi, I'm Alexander Sterling. I'm a tech CEO with too much money and too little life and a tendency to hide behind work. But I'm trying to be better. Rachel extended her hand. Nice to meet you, Alexander. He shook it formally, both of them trying not to laugh. Nice to meet you too, Rachel. Can I buy you a coffee? Only if we split it. Deal. As they walked out of the bookstore together, Alexander knew this was just the beginning. There would be challenges ahead. Questions about how their different lives could fit together. Complications he couldn't even imagine yet. But for the first time, he felt like they had a real chance. Not because he had hidden who he was, but because Rachel knew the truth and was willing to try anyway. That was worth more than all the money in the world. Starting over wasn't as simple as they had hoped. The first real date after their reconciliation felt awkward, like two strangers trying to remember how to talk to each other. Alexander picked Rachel up from her apartment and she noticed the car immediately. Not his usual sedan, but a luxury vehicle with a driver. "I thought we were being honest about everything," Rachel said as she slid into the back seat. "We are. This is part of my life. I have a driver because I'm usually working during commutes. But if it makes you uncomfortable, I can drive myself when we're together." Rachel considered this. "No, you're right. This is who you are. I need to get used to it." The restaurant he chose was different too. Not a diner or a casual spot, but a Michelin-starred establishment where the host greeted Alexander by name and led them to a private table. Rachel looked around at the elegant decor, the other diners in expensive clothes, and felt completely out of place in her simple dress. "This is where you normally eat?" she asked, studying a menu with no prices. "Sometimes, when I have business dinners or meetings with investors, but honestly, I'd rather be at the pizza place with you." "You don't have to pretend anymore, Alex. If this is your world, I need to see it. The real version, not the sanitized one." So he showed her. Over the next few weeks, Alexander introduced Rachel to his actual life. She visited his penthouse apartment, a sprawling space with floor-to-ceiling windows and modern furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum. Rachel walked through the room silently, taking it all in. "You could fit my entire apartment in your living room," she said finally. "I know. It's too big. I bought it because the real estate agent said it was a good investment. But I barely spend time here. It doesn't feel like home." Rachel picked up a photo frame from a shelf. It was the only personal item she could see. "Is this your family?" "Yeah, that's my mom, my dad, and Sophie. Taken about 20 years ago before my dad passed away. Your mom looks kind." "She is. But we're not close anymore. She thinks I've changed. Become someone she doesn't recognize." Alexander sat down on the pristine white couch that looked like it had never been used. "She's not wrong." Rachel sat next to him. "When was the last time you saw her?" "Maybe 6 months ago. She lives in New Jersey. I keep meaning to visit, but work always gets in the way." "What would happen if you just showed up this weekend? Unannounced?" Alexander looked at her. "She'd probably cry. Then feed me until I couldn't move. Then lecture me about working too much. Sounds like a mom." Rachel smiled. "Can I meet her?" "You want to meet my mother?" "If we're doing this for real, I should meet your family. And honestly, I'd love to meet the woman who raised you." That Saturday, they drove to New Jersey. Alexander's mother lived in a modest house in a quiet neighborhood,